Welcome back to Giant Monster Games. My name is Adrian, and today we are doing a deck called Favorable Faeries. Don't worry, no glitter was harmed in the making of this video. What exactly is Favorable Faeries? Well, it is a Favorable Winds deck, so we're running Favorable Winds, Scion of Oona, and Thunderclap Wyvern. These cards are the epitome of what our deck is doing. So, Favorable Winds is a deck that has been around for quite some time. It is a play flying creatures deck, then give them +1/+1, so you swing in for a whole bunch of damage that is kind of hard to block because Modern doesn't have a lot of really good flying creatures. So I was playing around with this deck and realized there's a lot of really good fairies we can be playing, so we are doing Favorable Winds with a fairies sub-theme. So we have Favorable Faeries. Favorable Winds, I just kind of explained what that does. Thunderclap Wyvern is doing almost the exact same thing. It is also on a body, flying body at that. And then Scion of Oona is actually a fairy lord, so fairy creatures, which we have a lot of, get +1/+1, plus our fairy creatures also get shroud. So this is going to be relevant as we start playing games because we prevent our opponent from wiping our board. Well, wiping our board is possible, but like Lightning Bolt, Fatal Push, Path, not as easy once we get this guy into play. The other thing about fairies, which is very interesting, is fairies tend to have a lot of flash abilities. But let's jump over and talk about our actual creatures, more specifically our fairies. We have Faerie Miscreant and Quickling. Faerie Miscreant is when it comes into play, if you have another Faerie Miscreant, you actually get to draw a card, which is really nice. Quickling, as you can probably guess, has a ton of really good uses, especially because you can do it at instant speed. We can use it in this exact case, if you're seeing on screen. We can bounce Faerie Miscreant if we have two of them in play, draw an extra card when we play it again, which is a neat little combo, but there's a lot of other really good combos we can do, because we can also use this to protect a blocker. So we're going to put a chump blocker up, and then we bounce it, bam, so we don't have to worry about it dying, which is a really cool thing. Or we can also do it if we swing with a bunch of things, and our opponent, say, blocks one of our fairies somehow, or one of our flyers, we can just bounce that creature to our hand once we play Quickling anyways. So those are the first two creatures we have. The next two creatures we have are Judge's Familiar and Spellstutter Sprite. So Spellstutter Sprite is obviously a fairy, which is helping our fairy quota go higher and higher, and Judge's Familiar is actually a really good non-fairy card because Judge's Familiar has the ability where we can sacrifice it, counter target instant or sorcery spell unless its controller pays 1, which puts a lot of decks off tempo because they kind of have to play around this. They have to leave up extra mana, or they have to kind of just intentionally bolt this guy, which is really not their optimum play. There's a lot of other things they're probably going to want to bolt other than Judge's Familiar. Judge's Familiar, on the other hand, doesn't really care if he gets bolted because he will probably try and counter it no matter what, so that's kind of fun. And then Spellstutter Sprite, which is a mouthful if you ask me, is actually just another form of control in our deck. So our deck has a bunch of control sub-themes as well. On top of being a fairy sub-theme, there's also control sub-themes, which is very interesting. So this is allowing us to counter target spell with converted mana cost X or less, where X is the number of fairies we have in play. Usually we're having like 2 or 3 fairies, so this is going to be countering usually anything that is relevant in Modern. I often will use it to counter stuff like Death Shadow, where it's 1, and I just, okay, well, let's play this guy and counter Death Shadow. Seems really easy to me. So it's a good example of the kind of cards you can be using with this. And then 2 and 3 drops are not that hard for us to achieve either because a lot of our stuff is fairies. So very cool, extra control. Both of these creatures are doing us a favor when it comes to controlling and making our opponent play a little bit off tempo, because something I haven't mentioned yet, we're a little bit more of a mid-range deck. We need to get to like turn 5, turn 6 before we actually get the kill, so we need to make sure we can get there. Control creatures will allow us to do that. The last two creatures we have is Cloudfin Raptor and Pride of the Clouds. Cloudfin Raptor is just a 1-drop that gets bigger as we play more creatures, because as we play more creatures, we have a lot of creatures that are going to come in a little bit bigger than Cloudfin Raptor, so it's just going to evolve probably 1 or 2 times throughout the game, so we're going to be getting like a 2/3 for 1 mana as we get to the mid to late game, which is usually the objective, so quite good. And then Pride of Clouds, which I'm only running 2 of because they're a little expensive and I don't really want to see this card a lot, it's going to get +1/+1 for each other creature with flying. Again, all of our creatures have flying, so it usually is going to come in as a 3/3 or 4/4, which is awesome. And then if we do get to a sticky spot in the mid to late game, we can always use this guy's forecast ability, which is creating a 1/1 blue-white bird creature token with flying, obviously. So that is a really cool thing. Obviously, forecast we have to do at our upkeep, so we're basically burning 4 mana off at our upkeep. So it's a late game play if you're really in a stuck situation. And those are all of our creatures, but let's talk about our spell package. We have Azorius Charm and Midnight Haunting. Azorius Charm is just giving us a bunch of utility if we need stuff. Creatures we control can get lifelink, which against a burn matchup is really good. We can also use it to draw a card if we are in a pinch. It's kind of the worst mode to actually draw a card on this thing. And then last thing is we can put target attacking or blocking creature on top of its owner's library, which is usually quite relevant, especially against big things that we just can't deal with. I'm talking about Eldrazi, I'm talking about sometimes Death Shadows if we didn't manage to counter them. So this is going to help us out a lot, and it has a bunch of modes, which is why we're playing it. Options are always nice, especially in a deck like this. And then Midnight Haunting is just going to create a bunch of flyers. Obviously, there are better token generating cards in white, but because we're mostly blue with a splash of white, and I couldn't be running something like Spectral Procession, which is white, white, white. Wasn't gonna happen. It was not gonna happen in this deck. This, on the other hand, is 3 instant speed, and we create 2 1/1 spirit creature tokens with flying, which is going to be relevant because we do need more flyers, and this is gonna get us there. And then the last 2 spells we have Oblivion Ring and Negate. So these are both giving us a little bit of control. Oblivion Ring is gonna allow us to get rid of stuff on the table that may be painful, so I'm thinking stuff like Ensnaring Bridge or other big creatures, and then Negate is allowing us to prevent our stuff from dying, because that is one thing that really happens quite often, is our opponent decides to wipe the board or tries to bolt our creatures or fatal push our stuff. We kind of want to have a little bit of control, a little bit of counter magic if we do get into that point, because we can't run the risk of us losing all of our threats in the actual first game of the match. We want to actually have a little bit of control just to be safe. Moving over to our land package now, we are running Faerie Conclave and Ghost Quarter. Faerie Conclave is awesome because it is a man land that turns into a fairy. Man land basically means it turns into a creature, not a human or a man. It can turn into a person land. If you really feel that way, fine. It turns into a person land, which is a fairy. You can pay 1 and a blue, and it turns into a 1/2 blue fairy creature with flying. This works well with all of the rest of our synergies, especially if we do have a Lord for fairies. It becomes a 3/2, which is fantastic. And then Ghost Quarter is just a little bit of main board hate if we are running up against some decks that are going to give us problems. I'm usually thinking about Tron, I'm thinking about Ponza tends to give us a little bit of trouble sometimes, so it is giving us a little bit more options when it comes to main board disruption for decks that we have a really hard time against. Our next 2 lands are Glacial Fortress and Prairie Stream. I have learned there are not that many budget blue-white lands in the format, so we're running these guys, only 3 between the 2, because we want a little bit more option. We don't want to get completely screwed over by not having white mana or not having blue mana, so we do want a little bit more options. This is why they're both here, and that's about all I have to say about them. And the last 2 lands we have are 6 plains and 6 islands. And that is the entire main deck, but before we break down this sideboard and the upgrade section, if you want to pick this deck up in paper, go over to Flipside Gaming and use promo code GIANTMONSTERGAMES to get 10% off your online purchase. Or, if you want to pick this deck up for MTGO, there is a link to Card Hoarder in the description below this video. Both of these things help out the channel directly by you playing Magic. So, if you want to do that, that would be amazing. Okay, jumping over to the sideboard. To start out with, we are running Ceremonious Rejection, Dispel, and Negate. Because our deck is very susceptible to removal and creature destruction stuff, we need a way of at least stopping our opponent from completely destroying everything we own. So, depending on what we go against, we can actually throw in a bunch of different types of counter magic to help us get there and prevent our opponent, so we can actually get to the mid to late game. The next 3 cards, Condemn, Vapor Snag, and Disenchant, are all a form of removal, specifically creature and or artifacts, and technically enchantments as well with Disenchant. So if our opponent is running big creatures, or we're running into big creatures, or we just need to get rid of stuff, we can use these cards to bounce that stuff back to your opponent's hand, get rid of it, put it on the library, do all kinds of different things. So we have a way of removing things that may be difficult for us to deal with. And the last 2 cards we have in the sideboard are Seize Claim and Tormod's Crypt. Tormod's Crypt, obviously getting rid of graveyards if we're against a graveyard deck, and then Seize Claim is helping us slow down decks that need specific types of mana. Lots of times, Seize Claim is kind of like a Tron helper card for us. It doesn't do as much as I want it to do because I would much rather be running a card like Spreading Seas, where we also get to draw a card when we play it. Obviously that card is not budget, so we're not playing it. Seize Claim is a good substitute in this situation. And that is the entire deck with the sideboard, but a budget deck would never be complete without a bunch of upgrade suggestions, so let's jump into that. So we have a bunch of fairies I would love to be running in this deck. We have Glen Elendra Archmage, Mistbind Clique, Sower of Temptation, and Vendilion Clique. Why do fairies have to have the craziest names humanly possible? Now, I want to point out, all of these are suggestions. These are fairies that I would suggest you run if you have them. I wouldn't run 4 ofs any of these. They are not a 4 of like, hey, this is just an obviously upgrade. They are the kind of fairies you put in to make your deck better, but you're going to be running like 1 ofs or 2 ofs. So Glen Elendra Archmage, you probably want to run 2 of that in your deck because it is a better counter card. You get to pay 1, sacrifice it, counter any non-creature spell, which is fantastic, and then it comes back into play with a -1/-1 counter on it. You can then use stuff like our Quickling to bounce it back to your hand and then replay it so you lose the counters on it, so it can consistently be countering non-creature spells. Stuff like Vendilion Clique. Again, you don't really want to run 4 of Vendilion Clique, but running like 2 of is a pretty good idea, maybe even 3 of. I mean, they're a really good card. It allows you to disrupt your opponent's hand in blue, which is not that common. Mistbind Clique, again, would be a really good 1 of because it is a 4-drop and it allows you to basically time walk your opponent. So you'd play this on the beginning of your opponent's turn during their upkeep, forcing them to either destroy the creature that you're going to champion or they get to tap down all their lands, which is really painful for your opponent. And then Sower of Temptation, again, is probably more of a sideboard card. I would actually probably put it as a sideboard because if you're running up against a big creature deck, I use Eldrazi as my like go-to big creatures, but you get to steal that creature. For 4 mana, you get to the mid game, bam, how about I steal your creature, and then I will swing in for the giant amount of damage. So again, probably more of a sideboard card, but again, a really good fairy, especially because you get to steal creatures, which is super duper funny. The next upgrades obviously is going to be land. We have Flooded Strand and Hollowed Fountain. If you're going to be upgrading your land package, you can also be running Spectral Procession, which is a better token generator, flying token generator, because we can actually, if you are running, again, an upgraded mana base, you can more reliably get white, white, white for turn 3 or turn 4, rather than right now where the deck is really has a hard time getting to white, white, white by turn. I don't even think we ever get to white, white, white. Again, upgrading your mana base allows you to play better cards such as Spectral Procession, so something to keep in mind. Talking about removal now, there's a couple removal spells that are better. Cryptic Command is really good, especially because we are heavily in blue already, and we're already a little bit control, so Cryptic Command, and then Spell Snare. Spell Snare basically hits anything that is really relevant in the format right now, so there's a ton of 2-drops that just having this allows you to slow down and take off the tempo that your opponent would be gaining, so Spell Snare I would like to run in this deck, or at least in the sideboard, if I was going to upgrade this deck. And then the last 3 cards are all actually sideboard cards if you were looking to upgrade the sideboard. We have Dismember, Rest in Peace, and Spreading Seas. I already talked about Spreading Seas. It's just a better version of Seas Claim, so it just kind of directly replaces that card. Rest in Peace is a better Tormod script technically, because it gets rid of all cards in graveyards, because we don't care about our graveyard. We don't need cards in our graveyard, so we can use something that just gets rid of all cards in graveyards. And then a Dismember is a removal spell that is a little bit better than any of the other removal spells we have, because we have Vapor Snag technically in the sideboard, but Vapor Snag's not as good as Dismember, because Dismember actually kills stuff. Vapor Snag just puts it back into your opponent's hand so they can play it again next turn. And that is going to be the entire Favorable Fairies deck. If you liked this video and want to see more videos just like it, leave a comment, thumbs up the video, and subscribe to Giant Monster Games. My name is Adrian though, let's go play some games where we see how well we can do with Favorable Fairies. Until next time, don't forget to game like a giant monster. I would like to throw a huge shout out to all of the Giant Monster Games Patreon supporters. You guys are helping make videos just like this possible. If you want to join them and become part of the Patreon madness, link is on the screen or in the description below the video.